I still remember that Tuesday afternoon like it was yesterday. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I stood in line at Henderson's hardware store, just another customer waiting to pay for a pack of screws. But what I witnessed next would completely shatter everything I thought I knew about human nature and trust. The man ahead of me was ordinary in every way possible. Mid-50s, wearing a faded blue jacket and work boots that had seen better days. His weathered hands clutched a single item, a small pack of washers that couldn't have cost more than $3. When his turn came, he approached the counter with the kind of confidence that comes from years of routine shopping. Sarah, the cashier, was someone I'd seen countless times before. A college student working part-time, always friendly but professional. She had that practiced smile that retail workers perfect after dealing with hundreds of customers daily. Nothing about this interaction seemed different from any other mundane transaction that happens thousands of times across America every day. That's when everything changed. The man reached into his jacket pocket, and instead of pulling out cash or a credit card, he produced something that made my heart skip a beat. It was a blank check, completely blank except for his signature scrawled across the bottom line. No amount written, no date, no pay to the order of, just his name signed with a blue ballpoint pen. He placed it on the counter with the same casualness as someone handing over a $20 bill. "This should cover it," he said, his voice carrying absolutely no hint that anything unusual was happening. Sarah stared at the check, then looked up at him with confusion written across her face. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. I found myself leaning forward, straining to hear what would happen next. Other customers behind me had noticed something was off too. Conversations died down and all attention focused on this bizarre scene unfolding at Register 3. The man just stood there, patient as could be, as if he'd done this 1,000 times before. What happened in the next few seconds would set in motion a chain of events that none of us could have predicted. Sarah's reaction wasn't just surprising, it was the beginning of something that would touch the lives of everyone in that store, including mine, in ways we never imagined possible. Sarah held the blank check in her trembling hands, staring at it like it was some kind of puzzle she couldn't solve. I watched her eyes dart from the signature to the empty amount line, then back to the man's weathered face. The entire store had gone quiet, even the background music seemed to have stopped playing. "Sir, I don't understand," Sarah finally managed to say. "There's no amount written on this check." The man's response sent chills down my spine. He smiled, not a mischievous grin or a confused look, but a genuine warm smile that seemed to light up his entire face. "I know," he said simply. "I'm trusting you to fill in what's fair." The weight of his words hit everyone within earshot like a physical force. Here was a complete stranger, handing over a blank check to a teenage cashier he'd never met before, putting complete faith in her honesty. In today's world of security cameras, fraud protection, and constant suspicion, this act of pure trust seemed almost alien. I could see Sarah's mind racing. Her training had certainly never covered this scenario. Corporate policy, common sense, and basic self-preservation all screamed that she should refuse the check, call a manager, or ask the man if he was feeling all right. But something in his eyes, a clarity and certainness that was impossible to fake, gave her pause. The man seemed to sense her internal struggle. "My name is Walter," he said softly. "I've been coming to this store for 12 years. I trust the people here, and today, I'm asking you to trust yourself." Sarah looked around the store as if searching for guidance. Her gaze landed on me briefly, and I could see the desperation in her eyes. What would you do in her position? Accept a blank check from a stranger? Refuse and potentially offend a long-time customer? Call for backup? The seconds ticked by like hours. Other customers were getting restless, but nobody wanted to leave. This was the kind of real-life drama that you couldn't turn away from. I found myself silently urging Sarah to make a decision, any decision, just to break the suffocating tension that had filled the store. Finally, Sarah took a deep breath. What she did next wasn't just surprising. It revealed something about human nature that I never knew existed. Her decision would ripple through that store, that community, and eventually, through my own life in ways that still give me goosebumps today. She picked up her pen, and with a steady hand that betrayed none of the nervousness in her voice, she began to write. Sarah wrote $2.89 on the check, the exact price of the washers, down to the penny. No tip for herself, no rounding up, nothing extra. Just the precise amount that appeared on her register screen. But what happened next turned this simple transaction into something that would change everyone's perspective on trust and humanity. Walter looked at the check, nodded approvingly, and then did something that made my jaw drop. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. "Keep this," he said to Sarah, placing it next to the check. "Not as a tip, but as a reward for your honesty. You could have written any amount on that check, but you chose integrity." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Sir, I can't accept this. I was just doing what was right." "Exactly," Walter replied. "And that's exactly why you deserve it." But the story was far from over. As Walter turned to leave, Sarah called out to him. "Wait. Why did you do this? Why take such a risk with a complete stranger?" Walter paused at the door, his hand on the handle. When he turned back, his expression was serious, almost grave. "Because 23 years ago, someone took a chance on me when I had nothing. A store owner in Detroit accepted my blank check when I was desperate and broke, trying to buy formula for my newborn daughter. I promised myself that when I was financially stable, I'd pay it forward." The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. This wasn't some random act of eccentricity, it was part of a decades-long chain of trust and generosity. Walter wasn't just testing Sarah's honesty, he was continuing a tradition that had probably touched countless lives over the years. As Walter left the store, something extraordinary began to happen. The customer behind me, an elderly woman I'd seen around town, approached Sarah's register with tears in her eyes. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed," she said, and then she did something incredible. She pulled out her own checkbook and wrote a check for $50 to Sarah. "Not for anything I'm buying," she explained, "but because witnessing your honesty today restored my faith in people. Use this to pay for someone else's groceries, someone who might be struggling." That's when I realized we weren't just witnesses to one man's unusual payment method. We were watching the birth of something bigger, a movement of trust and generosity that was spreading through the store like wildfire. Other customers began approaching Sarah's register, not to make purchases, but to contribute to what was spontaneously becoming a community fund for helping others. Within 30 minutes, Sarah had collected over $400 from complete strangers, all inspired by Walter's act of trust and her response of integrity. But none of us could have predicted what this would lead to, or how it would ultimately change the entire town. 3 days later, I found myself back at Henderson's hardware store, drawn by a curiosity I couldn't shake. The local newspaper had picked up the story of the blank check, and suddenly everyone in town was talking about Walter and Sarah. But there was something about Walter's story that didn't quite add up, and I needed to find out more. I approached Sarah during her shift, and she greeted me with the same warm smile I'd seen her give Walter. "You're the man who was in line that day," she said immediately. "Wasn't that incredible?" "It was," I agreed. "But I've been thinking about something Walter said. About the store owner in Detroit 23 years ago. Did he mention the name of that store?" Sarah's expression changed slightly. "Actually, he came back yesterday. He wanted to tell me the rest of the story." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "The store owner who helped him? His name was Henderson. Same last name as this store." My blood ran cold. "Henderson's Hardware in Detroit?" "No," Sarah said, shaking her head. "That's the incredible part. It wasn't a hardware store at all. It was a small grocery store called Henderson's Market. But get this, the owner, James Henderson, was the grandfather of our store owner, Mike Henderson." The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but the picture they were forming was more incredible than anything I could have imagined. "Are you telling me that Walter somehow tracked down the grandson of the man who helped him decades ago?" Sarah nodded slowly. "But that's not even the most amazing part. Walter didn't track anyone down. He's been living in this town for 8 years. He shops here regularly, but he had no idea about the connection until Mike Henderson mentioned his grandfather's old grocery store in Detroit during a casual conversation last month. The coincidence was staggering, but as Sarah continued her story, I realized it wasn't a coincidence at all. It was something much more profound. Walter told me that when he learned about the connection, he knew he had to complete the circle. But he wanted to do it in a way that would create the maximum positive impact. He'd been planning this blank check moment for weeks, waiting for the right opportunity. I felt a chill run down my spine. So this was all planned. The blank check, yes. But Walter's real plan was much bigger than just paying back a debt. He wanted to create a moment that would inspire others, just like James Henderson had inspired him. What he didn't expect was how far the ripples would spread. As Sarah spoke, I began to understand that we hadn't just witnessed a random act of trust, we'd been part of something orchestrated to demonstrate the power of human goodness. But even Walter couldn't have predicted what would happen next, or how his carefully planned moment would spiral into something that would ultimately expose a truth about our community that none of us saw coming. The blank check story had been circulating through our small town for 2 weeks when Mike Henderson, the store owner, called a community meeting at the local church. He said he had something important to share about Walter's visit, and the entire town showed up. I arrived early, expecting to hear a heartwarming speech about kindness and community spirit. I was completely unprepared for what Mike actually revealed. Most of you know the story of Walter's blank check, Mike began, his voice shaky with emotion. What you don't know is that Walter didn't just happen to discover my connection to his past. He sought me out deliberately, but not for the reason you might think. Mike pulled out a worn manila folder and opened it carefully. Walter came to me 3 months ago with this. He held up a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1987. The headline read, "Local grocery store owner dies in car accident, leaves behind wife and young son." The room fell silent as Mike continued. "This article is about my father, James Henderson Jr., who died when I was 8 years old. But the man who inspired Walter all those years ago wasn't my grandfather, James Sr., it was my father." My heart began racing as the implications of this revelation sank in. "Walter was there the night my father died," Mike's voice cracked. "He was the customer my father helped with the blank check that evening. After my father left the store, he was killed by a drunk driver on his way home. Walter read about it in the newspaper the next day and spent years feeling guilty, thinking that if my father hadn't stayed late to help him, he might still be alive." The church was dead silent. I could hear people crying, but I was too stunned to move. For 23 years, Walter carried that guilt. He tracked me down not to pay back a debt, but to ask for my forgiveness. He wanted to tell me about my father's final act of kindness, and to apologize for what he saw as his role in the accident. Mike wiped tears from his eyes before continuing. "But here's what Walter didn't know. What none of us knew until I started digging through my father's old papers after Walter's visit. My father had been struggling financially. The store was failing, and we were about to lose our house. The day he died, he had written in his journal that he was considering closing the store permanently." Mike held up a small, leather-bound journal. "But after helping Walter that night, my father wrote something that changed everything. He wrote, 'Today I remembered why I opened this store. It's not about profit, it's about being there when people need help most. Tomorrow I'm going to find a way to save this place.'" The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Walter's visit hadn't caused James Henderson's death, it had renewed his determination to keep helping people. "My father never got the chance to save the store," Mike concluded, "but Walter's blank check 23 years later did something even more powerful. It reminded all of us why we're here, to trust each other, to help each other, and to believe in the fundamental goodness of humanity." As I sat in that church, surrounded by my neighbors and strangers alike, I realized that Walter's blank check had revealed the most surprising truth of all. Sometimes the most profound acts of healing happen when we finally understand that the guilt we carry isn't ours to bear, and the love we give away always finds its way back to us, often in ways we never expect. The blank check wasn't just about trust, It was about forgiveness, redemption, and the incredible power of human connection across time and space. And in that moment, I understood that all of us, in our own small ways, are constantly writing blank checks with our lives, trusting that the people around us will fill them in with kindness. To support the channel, please leave a like and subscribe. Thank you so much.